Thanks, everyone. I think that this is pretty much the middle of the conference, right? So I want everyone just to go ahead and stand up, and just stretch. Okay, now I feel a lot less ridiculous being up here. Thank you. You can sit down now. All right. If there's anything that you're going to know about me by the end of this talk is I get really excited about alerting. Probably too exciting. It's almost like a Zen thing for me to write alerts because I know that I've got some control over the things that are going to wake me up in the middle of the night. I'm a senior engineer, operations engineer at Etsy. If you're not familiar with Etsy, we are trying to reimagine commerce in ways that build a more fulfilling and lasting world, and we do that by being the largest online marketplace for handmade and vintage goods. Last year, Etsy sellers grossed over $1.3 billion in sales. It's pretty significant, and those transactions are between individuals. So this guy right here, he went ahead and quilted the ugliest Christmas sweater everyone's ever seen. She bought it to show off to all her friends at the Christmas party, and that transaction happened between two people as opposed to going off and buying some commodity thing in a big box store. I think it's really awesome because it's a craft, right? And I think of the same way of my alerts. I'm crafting my alerts. A couple takeaways from this talk that I'd like you to walk away with. Some ideas for what makes good context. What's good context for you is not necessarily good context for me. It's really relevant, or really depends on what it is that you're alerting, what you care about. And probably most importantly, it's that computers should augment our work. Right? Computers are invented to do work for us. Oftentimes I feel like computers are giving me more work. And I want, when I'm woken up in the middle of the night, if a computer is going to wake me up, it should do some of that work on my behalf. So why would we want to add context? What's the big deal? Why isn't it not enough to just get an alert? Something's broken, right? I get woken up, great, I can go tackle this. If things are broken, that's all I need to know about, right? The problem with that idea, and I think it's exacerbated by the notion that when we get an alert, it's understood that something is bad. So there are no good alerts. Thresholds have a lot of weaknesses. It's probably another talk in and of itself, but we rely on them so heavily. But are all alerts indicative of a total failure? I posit not necessarily. Imagine, or think about the gas light in your car. Your car is not breaking down around you. It's letting you know you got 50 miles, 40 miles before it eventually does break down because you need to refuel. So it's really giving you a heads up, and that's what some of our alerts are. And as John mentioned, alert fatigue is a pretty significant issue, and there are a number of things that contribute to alert fatigue. Whether you've got a lot of high volume, low value alerts, you're getting a lot of noise, especially alerts that tell you really nothing or you can't take any action on. In fact, these things should never alert you anyhow, but as it stands, we still have to deal with some of that occasionally. Alert design really isn't a solved problem, and it really interests me, especially because it's very, very common for someone to write an alert and forget about it, which is where a lot of that noise comes from. Well, a good example would be probably the first time you set up your Nagios box, you got all the usual checks up and running, CPU checks, disk checks, memory checks, and it seemed good for a time. And then you implemented Redis, and all of a sudden Redis is using all this memory. Why? I don't care about memory alerts on my Redis boxes. I expect them to be using it. And as a result of this, you become desensitized to your alerts. You start to ignore them, which is also a big problem. But then you can't ignore them because they keep coming in, and there's this nasty feedback loop that adds to this anxiety you have because you're on call, adds to your distraction because you're on call. You could get a page at any moment. You lose sleep because you're woken up in the middle of the night. Some people have difficulty going to sleep just because they're on call, because they're thinking about what's going to happen. I know that after my on-call rotations, I sleep the soundest that night. I've got a jawbone to prove it. And I think that when you're on call and you're already tired, not having any context in your alerts makes it even more difficult because you've got to think extra hard about what things matter when you get this alert, what sort of things you're going to have to look up to understand what the situation is, understand how to resolve it. Worst case, you get woken up and you have no idea what's happening, because somebody's trolling. Let's read this alert real quick. It says, critical, critical. Nothing was checked. What? Something is wrong. Well, I did get an alert. Please check. There's more. Non-critical. Site impacting? Maybe. This is just as bad as a noise alert because I don't know if I can ignore it. I don't know if it's safe to do nothing about, if I can acknowledge this and go back to sleep, but I have to expend some amount of energy to look into it to even find out if I have to take any action on it. So what makes good context? Show of hands, anybody's got some ideas? What do you think makes for good context in an alert? Not a lot of hands, I'm glad you're in here. Yeah.
How many times is 5 fall?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Services dependent on that host.
How many times is fired before? Services depend on that host.
Information on what to do next.
Ooh, that's good. Run books.
How many other services that might have just also alerted?
How many other services might have alerted as well? That's good. These are all fantastic ideas. So how about, since we're using thresholds, tell me what the thresholds are. In fact, tell me what the current value is relative to that threshold. If my threshold is 100 things and the current value is 101, I just tripped the threshold. If it's 1,000, it means something entirely different. It gives me a sense of the severity of this issue. Is the site up? Is my application performing the way that my users expect to? In other words, why do I care? Are we still making money? If we are, maybe I don't respond as quickly, right? Because I'm getting out of the shower, I'm half shaven. Does that ever happen, right? Perhaps this is indicative of greater issues that could occur downstream. Again, think about the gas light in your car. It's just a precursor, it's a canary. It's a signal flare. There might be something else happening later on. It's giving you a heads up, which is why it's nice to have some granularity in your alerts, whether you've got warning alerts, critical alerts, anything in between. This is a big one that we're going to cover in a little more detail too. What did the author care about when the alert was written? Is there a run book? Was there some ticket that was filed that ended up resulting in this alert? Put that in the check, because it might be some useful information for me to look up, either during the issue, during the alert, or afterwards once everything's calmed down. I think that we could also rely on some common patterns. I think it's well understood that when you come to a stop sign, you don't think this is a stop sign, I need to stop. You just stop. It's red. Red tends to mean stop, broken, no. Green traffic lights, same thing. Green means go, it means good, it means operating. However, anybody in here that cannot read that? Okay, well, then you're lucky. There are, and I think in the Ignite, everyone was in the Ignite last night, right? There was a woman that spoke about accessibility, and I think it was a fantastic talk, and it's something we should be cognizant of, especially when you're being woken up, because even if you are not red-green colorblind or any of the other different color blindness that there are, I'm still only got one eye open when I'm walking down the steps looking at my phone trying to figure out what's happening. So while color can be a powerful medium for conveying information, it doesn't apply to everybody. So you have to be aware of color blindness. And in the example of the traffic light previously, if you are red-green colorblind and you can't discern the difference between them, well then position becomes just as important. So you know the light at the top is lit up, you should stop. The light at the bottom is lit up, you can go. I love to tell stories. That's why I'm up here. And your alerts have backstories tucked away inside them. These alerts didn't just spring out of nowhere. They exist for a reason. Something broke once, probably lots of times. There's at least one post-mortem, and someone said, I have a great idea, let's make an alert for that thing, and our past experience with this particular thing breaking means we're going to set the thresholds at these levels. But when you get the alert, what you're seeing is the final product of all those conversations, of all those experiences. It's like watching episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars because somebody thought that was the better story. And then seeing episodes 1, 2, and 3, seeing everything that led up to it and just how painful Jar Jar was, right? And a good way to get in that mindset of figuring out what is important, what part of the backstory is important, is to think about new teammates coming on board. What things do they not know about? They don't have that tribal knowledge around why that alert exists. I'm pretty certain that last example I showed you was one of those examples where nobody had any knowledge of what the hell that thing was. We ended up shutting that one off. So the second thing I wanted you to come away with was the notion that computers are augmentors. Sounds really simple, but it ends up being really, really powerful. So I built a fire pit in my backyard last year, and I kept thinking about different ways to phrase this, and it doesn't come out sounding funny. I like to light fires. And I couldn't remember this nursery I had bought some cordwood from, just loose cordwood. I don't need half a cord or anything more. I've just got a small rack outside for some cordwood. And I couldn't remember where this nursery was, so I did a quick Google search to try to find it. And this listing came up, and my focus was drawn to the hours of operation. Google knew it was Tuesday. Google knows I don't want to go to the nursery out of hours. So it highlighted for me by dimming the other content and bolding the Tuesday hours of operation. It drew my eyes to where the important information was. And I thought to myself, this is exactly what I want my alerts to look like. I want them to help me focus my attention. Then I came across a paper written in 1962 by a man named Doug Engelbart called Augmenting Human Intellect. And he describes augmentation as increasing the capability of a person to approach a complex problem situation, to gain comprehension to suit one's particular needs, and to derive solutions to problems. This sounds exactly like operations and alerting to me. Because when I'm woken up, the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out what is happening. I need to gain comprehension. I need to derive a solution. In other words, I need to stop the alert from alerting. I need to fix the thing. And if we enable faster resolution, we can get people back to sleep faster. And the way to do that is to help someone wrap their mind around what's happening. And I think about, what would I do when I get the alert? What are the things that I'm going to use or do to gather additional information? I'm going to sling a few commands in the terminal. I'm going to look at a couple graphs on some dashboards. I'm going to try to understand the behavior of this thing. And this segues really nicely into the conversation about OODA loops. I keep thinking about Fruit Loops. That's why this little boy is sticking his tongue out at you. I felt it was somehow appropriate. OODA is this concept. It's fascinating how it didn't even come out of the operations space. Colonel John Boyd of the United States Air Force developed this concept primarily to describe what a fighter pilot goes through in combat, in a dogfight. And the OODA stands for observation, orientation, decision, and action. And the idea is that when you're in the cockpit, you've got a lot of inputs coming your way, and it's coming fast. And you've got to make sense of all that information, figure out what you want to do, and then you've got to execute. And then after you've executed, there's going to be a whole new series of inputs. And the tighter and faster this loop is for you, the greater the chance that you're going to be successful. In the case of a fighter pilot, the greater the chance that you will shoot down your enemy. But I think that this is easily ported over to operations. And I believe that our monitoring systems straddle the observation and orientation phases fairly well. Particularly, let's take Nagios. Nagios is fielding information. It's running checks on our hosts all the time, checking our services. It's fielding a lot of inputs for us. When some threshold gets exceeded, it sends something to us. What it sends us, that context it sends us, does help us to orient ourselves around what's happening. And Colonel Boyd said the second O, orientation, as the repository of our genetic heritage, cultural tradition, and previous experiences is the most important part of the OODA loop. And I get really excited here, really excited, because this is where we get to augment our alerts. He goes on to say that that's how it shapes the way we observe. So effectively, all of your traditions, all of your experiences, in effect, all of your biases, they all shape the way you see a situation. So if we can provide relevant context around what's happening, some appropriate information, and rely on some common patterns, I think that what we can do is help the engineers get back to sleep faster. We can solve these problems faster. In effect, we're augmenting the orientation phase. So how do we do this? I'm going to focus on Nagios because that's what we use at Etsy, and that's what a lot of people use. But the ideas that we're going to discuss here are applicable really to any monitoring system. This is what I think of Nagios. It's not a bad, oh. Let's not go to that guy's neighborhood. But I think of Nagios as a simple commodity vehicle. It's very general purpose. It gives me the building blocks I need to build a monitoring system the way I see fit. All of you, the A-team, highly skilled, plucky, creative, you get to make Nagios into whatever you want. I couldn't find an image with a gun turret. I think every A-team band should have a gun turret, but that could just be my memory, childhood memories being a little bit askew. So where do we add context? We can do it within the Nagios checks. In fact, you should always do this. After Nagios, we tell Nagios what the exit status is, so it knows if we're talking about a warning or critical or recovery. You can spit out one line of output and say, this is the status of the thing. Everything after that new line is considered long output. You should use that to your benefit. You can also send alerts just before notification. So after the plugin, the Nagios plugin, the NRPE or the active check is returned, just before you send that email out or that page out, SMS, whatever, you can use that long plugin output to do really, really interesting things. And so my new favorite tool, Nagios Herald, does just that. So a brief history. I had been at Etsy for only about a couple months when I was there for my first hack week. And so I'm still absorbing everything, understanding the infrastructure, mapping my way through various teams. So I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to work on. And also while I was fumbling around with his phone, he's mumbling. I would love to have a graph in my alerts. So that's easy. I wrote a proof of concept notification script and did just that. And I picked on the disk-based alerts because those are probably the most despised alerts that folks get. And then my buddy Nassim came over, and he's got this very thick French accent, and it's even thicker when he gets excited. He's like, so I heard you want to work on this project, and I'd like to do this with you. I'm like, awesome. And Nassim brought this formal software development aspect to it, and actually made it something respectable. I had just slung a couple lines of Ruby and thought I was done, but Nagios Herald grew into this really, really, I think, amazing notification script and set of functions that allow me to add all sorts of context to my alerts. I want to give an example here. Just blink your eyes real quick, and I bet you don't see any of that. This is a disk space alert. This used to be our disk space alerts. I can kind of make out that there's a volume called /vertigo/data 9% something, lots of megabytes. I don't know if this is 9% free, 9% available. I see a lot of people squinting. You're like, I don't know what this is. This is difficult enough to parse on its own, let alone at 3 a.m. when I get woken up. Oh, yeah. Before I even walk down the steps, I can clearly see which volume is problematic. I've got a 24-hour graph from Ganglia showing me the disk utilization on this box. Because I always assume when I get a disk space alert, there's some process that's run amok and hasn't been cleaning up after itself, and utilization is spiked in maybe the last 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever. In this case, this has been going on for the last 24 hours, just gradually growing. Unfortunately, because I didn't blow this up well enough, but the disk check also goes and runs the df command for me. right? Like I said earlier, there's certain commands that I might want to run on the terminal. Have the check do it for you. And as a result, I use that information to pull in these graphs. I can colorize. It's kind of orange there. But I'm also telling the operator what the warning threshold was and why this alert went off. Finally, I think it was Lindsay. Lindsay said, you want to know how many times something has alerted? He's a plant. I can query logstash and say, hey, how many times has this thing gone off in the last week? Because if it's only been one time, it's bad because it's alerting, right? But it's only been one time, that's another piece of information I can use to determine if I've got to take action on this. If it's been going off at least once a day, there's some other underlying issue that I'm going to have to address. So briefly, here's a quick diagram of the internal. So Nagios Herald boils down to basically a notification script. When a check fails, Nagios needs to know which script or scripts it needs to fire up to send a notification to an operator. The power in Nagios comes from the formatter. The formatter is the thing that makes those emails so pretty. And formatters optionally can call on helpers, things that will go out to graphite, pull down images, Ganglia, query logstash. There's really no limitation to what Nagios Herald can do other than your imagination. So if you think about it, if you dream it, sounds really motivational. If you dream it, it'll happen. So in just a quick Nagios config example here, so I define a notification command for notifying when hosts and services are down or having issues via email. The formatter line is basically where Nagios Herald knows which formatter to use to make the content the way that you need it to be. And in the service definition, you'll see this custom Nagios variable. Any variable in a Nagios service definition that's prefixed with an underscore is assumed to, or understood to be a custom variable. So I'm defining the check disk formatter here, and that's the thing that goes out and colorizes the content. It pulls in the graphs, whatever I think I might need. So this is going to get really awesome here. Right? I get did I say I get excited for designing alerts? I'm going to say it again. This is a CPU alert. Again, it's a wall of text. If I'm not burning CPU cycles, why did I buy the system to begin with, right? So what is this really telling me? Nothing much. Now, I'm probably going to go run the PS command and find the top N processes they're running to make some sense of what's happening here. So I just have, I've done that in the check. In the Nagios check that says, hey, tell me what the CPU is like. If you see something over a given threshold, why don't you go ahead and run PS for me, right? But there are different reasons that the CPU there might be different reasons that I care about the CPU utilization. It doesn't look like old Larry there is doing a whole lot running PS at 6% of the CPU, but this is a mocked up example. But you can see I've highlighted the IO8 value. So maybe it's not a problem that I'm using CPU, but the CPU is waiting on disk a lot. I can expose that here. Memory's in the same boat. Again, if this were a Redis box or Memcache box, I don't care about memory alerts. However, maybe I want to know what's running, what the top running processes are. So again, I just run PS, find the top processes by memory, spit it out, basically draw the operator's attention to the very, very, very top thing, like the firewood that I like to light from the nursery. And in a glance, I focused my attention, I focused the operator's attention on what things they would have done anyhow. I'm helping them focus on what they're going to go do later. In fact, I've saved them a step. Here's an example of an alert where we're pulling in Ganglia graphs, or sorry, graphite graphs. This particular check looks back in the past 5 minutes to understand if the cumulative values for that thing are above a certain threshold. And I thought it'd be really cool to see not only that 5-minute view, but the 24-hour view as well. Because everything's coming along just fine throughout the day, and bam, all of a sudden there's a spurt in activity. That's useful to me. I also know what the warning and critical thresholds are and what the current value is relative to those. So it helps me gauge how severe this issue is. Y'all ready for this? Anybody use Elasticsearch? A lot of people. When you query the cluster to find out how well it's doing, it comes back and says green, red. It's like, you know, you walk up to somebody and say, how are you doing? Yeah. It doesn't tell me anything. Unfortunately, what happens, because you need something quickly, is folks will map those colors and the responses from Elasticsearch to warning, critical, and OK. But this drives me crazy because I don't know why it's critical. I know it's red. So how about we have the check, go ahead, and if the status of the cluster is non-green, tell me that. And if you dig into the Elasticsearch documents, it'll tell you what red, yellow, and green mean. And yellow in this case means all the primary shards are active, but you've got some issues with your replica shards. So why don't we go ahead and get the status of all of our Elasticsearch indices, and for all of those indices that are non-green, tell me which shards are having a problem. This is fantastic, except that's still a ton of text. Yes! Look at all that color. I can see clearly that there is one index there that's yellow, and I can see which shard it's having an issue with. Now, unfortunately, Gmail's doing this. I just recently wrote this formatter, and Gmail's doing something goofy by inserting a lot of extra spaces willy-nilly. But you get the general idea that I don't even care about that big block of green. I can focus in right on the index that's having an issue, and then go and look at the information about the shard, and I can go after that. Any questions so far? Are you excited too? Yeah, all right. So, I need some help. Nagios Herald is, I think, super useful, but I think it's going to be more useful if you bring your experiences and your biases and apply it to the checks and the alerts that you yourself are writing, that you are receiving, the things that are waking you up in the middle of the night. You can go out to Etsy's GitHub repo and immediately download it. There are already a number of very generic formatters that are available there. If you want to write your own formatters that are specific to your company, Nagios Herald will also facilitate that. You could specify an alternate directory. Nagios Herald will merge the built-ins with yours, so you don't have to expose some of the things that you feel maybe you can't. We need a lot more tests. I've never written tests before. That's one of the things that Nassim said to me. Is like, you know, you're going to have to write some more tests. Right? That was actually kind of Spanish, not French. It's terrible. I'll never be good at stand-up. But I never wrote tests. And the thing about tests, when you write them, they're addictive. Right? They're a little bit scary first because you have to kind of refactor your code so that the tests actually work. But I've written a number of tests. Nassim's written some tests. And I would like all of you to write tests as well, especially for the formatters and helpers that you write. And we definitely need some more documentation. I think I've done a decent job with the docs, but again, each of you will bring your own biases and experiences to it. And because I'm in it all the time, if you try to implement the system and you find that there's a problem in doing so, as you probably heard a number of other folks that work in other projects like Lindsay and Jesse that said, if the docs don't work for you, it's a bug. I agree with that. If you can't get this thing up and running in short order, there's a bug there. All right, so going out to github.com/etsy/Nagios Herald, download it, start coding, and send me emails about how excited you are about your alerts. I've got office hours later on today from 5 to 5:40 at table 2 in the sponsor pavilion. You want to talk all things alerting or burning things, I'm there. And then just a couple resources here. I'll post these slides shortly. If you want to learn more about the project, I blogged at least once about alert design. Engelbart's paper and OODA loops, you can get some links there. I failed to mention, my apologies, this link about color contrast when we were talking about color blindness. When I'm writing alerts, even when I'm writing dashboards, I try to be conscious of helping anybody differentiate between various data points, especially when I'm stacking a lot of data in aggregate. and I might have 10 things going on. I try to find contrasting colors so that somebody can pull out exactly what that thing is that's spiked or has dipped. And this link here will take you to a really cool project on the GitHub IO site. I forget the person who wrote the project contrast ratios, Leah Veru. I can thank Laura Swanson for this because not only does this help you with your presentations, it helps you find contrasting colors that make your content stand out. And that would be really useful for designing your alerts. That's it. Any questions?
I was wondering, do you alert via SMS and email together so that you get a wake up and then you look at the email, or how do you alert?
Yeah, the question is, do you alert via email and SMS? We let our operations staff decide how they want to be alerted, but you can. You can. And so there is functionality in Nagios Herald to craft a shorter pager message if you want. So in that example where I showed the notification command, it specifically was creating email alerts, but it does support pagers, basically pager size alerts, and coming shortly, it'll spit things out into IRC. Yeah.
Is there any added risk with the formatters and processors that you're adding in? That there could be a failure there, failing to process or gather the data or whatever you need that ultimately ends up the email doesn't get sent to you?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So is there any risk to having Nagios Herald in the notification pipeline? Could the formatters fail, the helpers fail? Absolutely. So that's some of the work that needs to be done in Nagios Herald, is to build timeouts into web requests or to handle failures gracefully. There is some of that built in. Ultimately, there are going to be some things that are outside of Nagios Herald's path, such as if your mail-out systems are busted, postfix shuts down, whatever, you're not going to get those notifications regardless. So what we've done in those cases is we've got some out-of-band process that just checks the difference between the Nagios core logs and Nagios Herald's logs, see if there's any drift, and if there's anything outside of if there hasn't been a notification in a certain period of time, we just assume something's wrong and we shoot an email out. Which, unfortunately, if email's not working, you're not going to get that either. All right. Not a solved problem.
Is there an additional delay because of adding more context? And does the delay even matter?
There will be. I mean, I gave you some ideas of what I think good context can be. You're going to ultimately decide what good context is for you. And what that means is how much you cram into that message. Right? 1 or 2 graphs, I think, is pretty acceptable. I don't need an entire volume of information. So the more you add and the more helpers that you're calling on, yeah, it's gonna add some delay. And of course, that's one of the things that I was describing in answering the question about there being risk. Have to kind of, I think to a certain degree it doesn't matter, because I'd rather have the information and get it 30 seconds later than not have it. Right? It's a good question though. Anybody else? Yep.
I came in a little late, may have missed this. Have you noticed any reduced time to recovery out of this?
Yeah, I've had, well, not reduced time to recovery, but I've had increased time to get back to sleep. If that counts, I think that's pretty significant. Coworker of mine sent me an email. She sent an email around to the team and said it was a disk space alert. The haunted, dreaded disk space alert went off. He got it. He said, I saw exactly what it was. I know I didn't have to do anything about it, so I acknowledged it and didn't even get out of my bed. That for me was a win. Because there was enough information for the engineer to realize, yes, this is important, but it's not important enough for me to get up. It could wait till the morning.
If you've got things like an alert that has enough context to be able to say, this doesn't matter, can you get to the point where you actually don't need to alert at all?
Absolutely. So the flip side of this, the question was, if you put enough context into your alerts to recognize that this is something that doesn't matter, can you then turn that alert off? Absolutely. And I think that is that one example demonstrated there was a totally unclear message being sent to the operations engineer. Designing alerts isn't just about the new stuff that we add to it. It's about periodically going through and understanding if these alerts are still relevant, if they should still wake someone up. And there's a handy tool that we released back in June or so, Ops Weekly, which is really beneficial in helping to categorize your alerts and understand which of those things that are waking up your engineers, which are the things that are the highest volume, to help augment that decision. Yeah. One all the way in the back real quick. Yeah, sorry.
You covered it.
Oh, okay.
Have you put any, how much effort have you put into auto remediation for things that, you know, situation A comes up, the answer is always action B. Have you put anything into there to have the machine take over the machine?
Yeah, we have. That's probably outside the scope of Nagios Herald, but you know, event handlers are really handy for being able to restart processes or take some other action. I think someone just came up with an idea recently that if a disk fails in the middle of the night, we're not going to get someone out to the data center in time, but you can have Nagios open a JIRA ticket for you, so that first thing in the morning, the data center engineers can see that and take care of it. Yep.
In which context would you email the developer that you're firing?
Oh, again, that's totally outside the context of Nagios Herald, but the question is, at which point would you email the developer? That's more of, I think, a cultural question. We're pretty lucky at Etsy where we have people that are just as excited about alerts as I am, and they want to get them. They want to get woken up. We have several teams that write their own alerts, and they get woken up, not the ops team. Way in the back. I'm sorry, can you speak up? It was a question, why are we stopping at formatting the alert and not taking action? Oh, Nagios Herald is, as I said, the way I view Nagios is this commodity thing. It gives me all these building blocks. I can fashion it however I want it to be. It means I can write a notification script that does whatever I need to. Taking action is something else that I can have Nagios do on my behalf. So Nagios Herald is specifically handling what to do when an alert fires, adding context to the alert so that the engineer knows what to do. There are some cases where you don't want to have the computer do the work for you. In some cases you might. It might be safe if you've got a cluster of web systems, it might be safe to just restart Apache on that one node. That's okay. That's a determination you have to make, right? The thing is, as our CTO said and has said several times, that computers are really fantastic at automating failure for us, right? I paraphrase, he said it better. Any other questions? All right, this is awesome. I hope to see each and every one of you around the table at the office hours at 5 o'clock. Thanks a lot.